All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. It is Tuesday, and you know what that means. Time to dive deeper into whatever book or direction we are going into. Last week, we went into Power versus Force unexpectedly, and we ended up talking about kinesiology and David Hawkins. I was actually planning on just talking about some of the themes or ideas that come to us from Power versus Force, but it's such a profound and powerful book, we ended up talking about kinesiology because that is a base for Dr. David Hawkins' research. It's where he began, I think. I mean, the story is real long, but as far as getting into this field of applied kinesiology and later mapping out the levels of consciousness and the study of consciousness began for him with this kinesiologic response to truth and falsehood. And so where we finished up last week on this video, the series, Kinesiology, David Hawkins, I don't believe we're going to read this entire book here. That would be a long series, ladies and gentlemen. That might take our entire lifetime. No, I'm kidding. But here's a little bit I highlighted here. In our discussion of the levels of consciousness, this is coming from the book, we noted that one of the downsides of pride is denial. Every mind engages in denial in order to protect its supposed correctness. This begets the fixity and resistance to change that prevents the average consciousness from advancing much more than 5 points in a lifetime. Great leaps in level of consciousness are always preceded by surrender of the illusion that I, quote unquote, know, that I know the way that everything should, frequently the only way we can reach this willingness to change, the book says, is when one hits bottom, quote unquote. That is by running out a course of action to its end in the defeat of a futile belief system. You might be thinking to yourself, what does this have to do with anything? I don't know. We're here checking out Power versus Force, and I'm interested in everything. So hopefully you are too, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here. It is a beautiful day here, and hopefully it's beautiful wherever you are. Hopefully everybody is well, and hopefully you got yourself a beverage of choice. I forgot to make some tea today. I drink a lot of water lately. Water's good in the summer, especially, ladies and gentlemen. But let's continue this description of changing a belief system that's so much of a struggle for many of us in our lives. Light cannot enter a closed box. The upside of catastrophe can be an opening to a higher level of awareness. So I was saying our willingness to change is minimal until we hit, so to speak, bottom, rock bottom, or that is by running out a course of action to its end in the defeat of a futile belief system. And so if life is viewed as a teacher, it then becomes just that. Unless the painful lessons of life with which we deal are transformed through a new view, a new perspective, a different way of looking at it. Remember that if life is viewed as a teacher, it then becomes just that. If not viewed in this way, it will not be seen as that, and it will not become that for you until you are ready. unless the painful lessons of life with which we deal are transformed through humility into gateways of truth and growth, and lesson teaching and development, then they are wasted. Wow. Wow. That is in the section entitled The Evolution of Consciousness, page 267. That was the last page of the chapter. Fascinating. But we'll go all the way back to where we left off last time in the story of the beginning of kinesiology and applied kinesiology, and this understanding of the weird nature of this universal truth and false response that you can get through the kinesiologic practice. And remember, we were talking about Dr. Diamond, who studied initially, it says here, we'll go back over a little bit of what we did last week. A striking aspect of Diamond's research was the uniformity of response among his subjects. And so he was finding responses for totally undetermined reasons. Certain abstract symbols caused all subjects to test weak, others strong. Some results were perplexing. Certain pictures with no, overtly negative or positive content, so neutral pictures, quote unquote, would also cause this. And this testing weak or testing strong, if you missed last time and don't know about kinesiology, then be sure to go check it out. But simply assuming there is no physical problem with the muscle and the subject is in a normal, relaxed state of mind, Dr. Diamond's startling discovery back in the 1970s, and this came from even before then, from Dr. George Goodhart, who pioneered the specialty that he called applied kinesiology. I just wanted to run back over this, and then we'll continue with where we were going on Dr. David Hawkins' story, because he's the key figure for us. But Dr. John Diamond refined this specialty into a new discipline he called behavioral kinesiology, or later deemed applied kinesiology. And so his startling discovery was that indicator muscles would strengthen or weaken in the presence of positive or negative stimuli, positive or negative emotional and intellectual stimuli, as well as physical. A smile would make you test strong, while the statement, "I hate you," would make you test weak. And so that is an example. Now, while listening to recordings of demonstrable true statements, the subjects universally tested strong. This was the starting point of the work of the author of some of the most renowned spiritual teachings, Dr. David Hawkins, and the author of this book. I thought it would be cool if we could dive into some of the wisdom of Dr. David Hawkins, because he had a profound spiritual impact, and that's what we're into on this channel, is seeking to discover spiritual philosophy, ladies and gentlemen. Seeking to achieve and maintain happiness through a greater awareness and a greater understanding, through enlightenment. So, with that being said, the well-known psychiatrist and physician David Hawkins, in 1975, Hawkins began research on the kinesiologic response to truth and to falsehood. And so remember, this book began with the question, what if you could get a demonstrably true, unarguable true answer as to whether something was truth or falsehood, and you knew the answer was 100% true all the time? Well, let's pose this question again. How much of society would be changed in the fields from communications to ethics, in our most basic concepts and in every detail of daily existence? It would be so profound that it is difficult to even conceive what life would look like in this subsequent new era of truth. The world as we know it would be irrevocably changed, right down to its very roots, ladies and gentlemen. And so, let's finish up this little section here. Maybe we'll see where we go today. Talking about David Hawkins beginning his research into this field of truth versus falsehood and consciousness, what eventually led to him calibrating the levels of consciousness and creating the map of consciousness. Now, it's been established, the book begins or continues, reading from Power versus Force, for purposes of expanding the mind and teaching and commentary. It's been established, quote, that test subjects did not need any conscious acquaintance with the substance or issue being tested. In double-blind studies and in mass demonstrations involving entire lecture audiences, subjects universally tested weak in response to unmarked envelopes containing artificial sweetener, and strong to identical placebo envelopes. The same naive response appeared in testing intellectual values. What seems to be at work is a form of communal consciousness. Now, this is where it gets deep. What seems to be at work here is a form of communal consciousness, spiritus mundi, or as Hawkins calls it, following Jung, a database, quote unquote, of consciousness. The phenomenon seen so commonly in other social animals, whereby a fish swimming at one edge of a school will turn instantaneously when its fellows a quarter mile away flee from a predator. This idea pertains in some subconscious way to our species as well, ladies and gentlemen. And so think about that. This idea that a collective consciousness exists, a spiritus mundi, so to speak, or this idea of a database of consciousness that we are all connected to. And this is something that a lot of people have thought about, especially if you're here listening to a video about consciousness and power versus force. But it's something that not so many average, or, you know, maybe those of us just living our lives every day, have the time to devote to thinking really deeply about these topics of collective consciousness. But let us continue. There are simply too many documented instances, the book continues, of individuals having intimate acquaintance with information experienced firsthand by remote strangers for us to deny that there are forms of shared knowledge other than those achieved by rational consciousness. Or perhaps, more simply, the same spark of inner sub-rational wisdom that can discriminate healthy from unhealthy can discriminate true from false. And that innate sub-rational wisdom that it's saying there, to me, was your ability to look at two different kinds of fruit and go, yes and no, based on the appearance, and your subconscious, or this inner sub-rational wisdom. And so he's saying maybe that the fact that we can discriminate healthy from unhealthy can also do this for truth and falsehood. This was just the beginning, though, of Dr. David's research, Dr. Hawkins' research, into an incredible and astounding discovery. One highly suggestive element of this phenomenon, the book continues, is the binary nature of the response. Hawkins found that questions must be phrased so that the answer is very clearly yes or no. Like a nerve synapse that is on or off, like the most basic cellular forms of knowledge, like so much of what our cutting-edge physicists tell us is the essential nature of universal energy. Is the human brain at some primal level a wondrous computer linked with the universal energy field that knows far more than it knows it knows? These are the questions I love to ask, ladies and gentlemen. But that was a funny one coming from Dr. Hawkins. Maybe. No, this is E. Whalen, the editor from Bard Press, who has been giving us this introduction and a little bit of a history to applied kinesiology and consciousness. But is the human brain at some prime level a wondrous computer that is linked with the Tao, with God, the universe, with a universal energy field that knows far more than it knows that it knows? Be that as it may, the book continues, as Dr. Hawkins' research continued, his most fertile discovery was a means of calibrating a scale of relative truth by which intellectual positions, statements, or ideologies could be rated on a range of 1 to 1,000. This is speaking of the map of consciousness. One can say this item, quote unquote, book, philosophy, teacher, calibrates at 200. Yes or no? And then at 250, yes or no? And you would get these weak or strong responses, true or false responses, and so on, until the point of common weak response determines the calibration. The enormous implication of these calibrations was that for the first time in human history, ideological validity could be appraised as an innate quality in any subject. Through 20 years of similar calibrations, Hawkins was able to analyze the full spectrum of the levels of human consciousness, developing a fascinating map of the geography of man's experience. This anatomy of consciousness produces a profile of the entire human condition, allowing a comprehensive analysis of the emotional and spiritual development. It's powerful. It's like, wow. Because to so many out here, so many of us, these ideas of spirituality and consciousness and God, or the Force, or the Tao, Atum from the Hermetic series we're doing on Wednesdays. These ideas aren't physical, tangible things that you can touch and have maps of and charts. Spirituality and God and consciousness and all of this stuff are very intangible, and some people would say they're just fanciful theories and hopes that make you feel better about yourself. But hopefully we're above that if we are here. So thank you for being here. And if you are there, then go back and look at a lot of the other videos I've done on this channel, and that will get you feeling better. But it is amazing to me, and it was mind-blowing to me, that these ideas, when it comes to consciousness and spirituality, can be, through 20 years of calibrations, he was able to analyze the full spectrum of the levels of consciousness, developing a fascinating map of our experience, emotional experience. And it produces a profile allowing a comprehensive analysis. This is very important for all of us, of the emotional and spiritual development of not only ourselves and individuals, but we could analyze the emotional and spiritual development of societies and the entire human race in general. And so the tide that raises all boats, so to speak, I've talked on this channel about the critical mass, or the 100th monkey, and this idea that we will reach a point where enough of us are of a high enough level of consciousness, and the science and the proof is presented in this book for that. Maybe we'll get to that one day. But that an emotional and spiritual development, which is what I'm all about on this channel, is trying to increase our awareness and our understanding of ourselves and the nature of reality and God and everything, so that we can increase the quality of our lives through this personal development. And so profound, the book continues, and far-reaching a view provides not only an understanding of man's journey in the universe, but also a guide to us all as to where we and our neighbors are on the ladder of spiritual enlightenment, and where we are on our own personal journeys to become who we could be, to become who our potential is awaiting for us to unlock. I'm of the group that likes to think that we have innate abilities, such as telecommunication and telekinesis, and many dormant abilities that we haven't used for thousands and thousands of years. But that goes with the cycles of the great year, so to speak, the cycles from the golden age and back into the dark age, and so on and so forth. However long or short these time periods are, and however, I also, think there's smaller versions of these cycles within the cycles. Concentric rings. That's interesting. Concentric rings, one within the other. But if they're spinning, that's a different thought, sorry. So in this volume that we're holding here today, that you could get for yourself to put on your shelf if you want, in this volume of Power versus Force, Dr. Hawkins brings these fruits of decades of research and insight into the penetrating illumination of revolutionary discoveries in advanced particle physics and nonlinear dynamics. For the first time in our Western intellectual record, he shows the cold light of science is confirming what mystics and saints have always said about the self, about God, and the very nature of reality, which is what we are always researching here on this channel. That this vision of being, essence, the book continues, and divinity presents a picture of man's relation to the universe that is unique in its capacity to satisfy both soul and reason. Both soul and reason, ladies and gentlemen. There is a rich intellectual and spiritual harvest here, much that you can take, and much more that you can give yourself. And it says, turn the page, for the future starts now. E. Whalen, editor, Bard Press, Arizona, in 1995, ladies and gentlemen. So it's been some time since then, being 2023 now. Fascinating. And then it says, this is now the original preface. What you just read was the original foreword. Well, let's take a pause right there, because to explain that which is simple, quote unquote, can be difficult indeed. I like that. To explain what is simple, quote unquote, can be difficult indeed. The outer work can never be small if the inner work is great. And the outer work can never be great if the inner work is small. From Meister Eckhart, 14th century Christian mystic. So the other time I was reading and I wasn't sure if Meister Eckhart was Eckhart Tolle or not. I was very wrong on that one. It's a 14th century Christian mystic. It's about the inner work, ladies and gentlemen. That's what a lot of this is about. Is going within ourselves and doing the work to not only change our thoughts and change our life and change the way that we look at things, so the things that we look at and experience in our lives change for us, but it's doing that process continually, because little inner work will result in little outer work. And so now let's take a little look at the wisdom of David R. Hawkins, and maybe this might be the book that we start doing on Tuesdays, because Power versus Force is huge. It's huge, ladies and gentlemen. This one is shorter. Do not compare yourself with others regarding holiness, merit, goodness, deservingness, sinlessness. Do not compare yourself to others. What others are is irrelevant. These are some valuable qualities for a spiritual seeker. Realize that all human notions you have about being better, and God is not limited by human notions. So, praised by Mother Teresa and Dr. Wayne Dyer for his breakthrough research and innovative teachings on the human mind, Dr. David Hawkins took our understanding of spiritual truth and enlightenment to an entirely new level. Took mine to an entirely new level. And it's amazing that he was praised by Dr. Wayne Dyer, because we read Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life by Dr. Wayne W. Dyer on Tuesdays previously on this channel. If you missed that entire series, that was Living the Wisdom of the Tao and reading through the Tao Te Ching and extrapolating on each of the 81 verses and the spiritual and philosophical lessons that the Tao and Lao Tzu had to give to us from 2,500 years ago from his mystical spiritual perch. And Wayne Dyer has been the biggest influence in my spiritual journey so far, I would say. Although there's many, many, many others that deserve credit for that as well. Now, this understanding of truth, spirituality, and enlightenment going to an entirely new level thanks to Dr. David Hawkins, a nationally renowned psychiatrist, physician, researcher, spiritual teacher, and lecturer. David Hawkins was the founding director of the Institute for Spiritual Research, Incorporated, and the founder of the path of devotional non-duality. Wow. He devoted almost 3 full decades to understanding the potential of the human spirit. And his research led to techniques that anyone can use to elevate their quality of life. In this book, adapted from David Hawkins' many lectures, interviews, and audio programs, readers will be brought to higher levels of awareness, control, and understanding. This book includes 10 volumes of David Hawkins' core teachings that are the most beneficial and relevant to today's world, including his map of consciousness calibration process. So, let's let the wisdom of Dr. David Hawkins take us on a journey on some of the most valuable qualities for a spiritual seeker. Amazing, ladies and gentlemen. Amazing. And so, the wisdom of Dr. David Hawkins, classic teachings on spiritual enlightenment. And this is a Hay House book. You got to love Hay House. They really produce some incredible content. This will talk about such things as moving from the ego to service and spiritual consciousness, obstacles that can get in the way of spiritual growth, surrender even, and truth, the 9 fundamentals of conscious spiritual growth, spiritual practices, enlightened healers, and simply the topic of enlightenment. Those who had the great fortune, the book says here in the foreword, to hear Dr. David Hawkins speak in person will never forget what it was like. People from all walks of life, even from faraway countries, attended the sold-out monthly seminars he offered. We heard the material he presented, yet we experienced something deeper than words. The information was delivered via a carrier wave of love, silent and all-pervading. Historically, this nonverbal transmission has been called the grace of the teacher, though through his oral teachings, he conveyed profound truths in a personable way that awakened the inner self of the listener. A transformative effect occurs also through his writing. The late spiritual and self-help author, Wayne Dyer, called Dr. Hawkins' book Power versus Force perhaps, quote, this is what Wayne said about Power versus Force. We just finished a Wayne Dyer series, and now we're having Wayne, in his own words, link us to what we've been talking about last Tuesday and today here now. This is just amazing how the universal synchronicities link these kind of things together on our journey. If you get wild synchronicities like this, leave me a comment and let me know, because that means that you are on the path. And so, what did Wayne say? He said, Wayne Dyer called Hawkins' book Power versus Force, quote, perhaps the most important and significant book that I have read in the past 10 years. Wow. The most powerful book I've read in the last 10 years. It's Power versus Force. With that being said, as you read this book, you will perhaps realize why someone described his lecture style as a mixture of Einstein, the Buddha, and Mr. Magoo. He was a liberated being, Dr. David Hawkins was. Free, spontaneous, compassionate, humorous, and totally available. All right. With that being said, let's dive into the intro here to chapter 1, called Moving from the Ego to Service. And if you've been here for this video or last week's video, talking about consciousness and calibrating the levels of consciousness and kinesiology and all this, be sure to check out David Hawkins' map of consciousness. We'll look at it later in this series. It didn't really pop up to me right away. Sometimes it's like the first thing that I see, but not this time. So chapter 1 here is moving from the ego to service. Now, this is the beginning of personal spiritual work. And what does moving from the ego mean? What is the ego? Well, if you are asking those questions, you're asking the right questions. It begins by saying, quote, the vast majority of self-help teachers encourage people to follow outward, assertive, ego-oriented methods of attempting to achieve long-lasting wealth and happiness. But having traveled that path himself early in life, Dr. Hawkins knew that the ego path was ultimately a dead end and does not solve the problems of happiness that we think that it will. So if you're in your own process, attempting to create a better quality of life for yourself, or attempting to manifest $1 million, remember that it is not the things that you are trying to manifest, but it is the feelings. So usually when we are trying to create money for ourselves in our lives, what we're really seeking is comfort and security and financial security and well-being, in a sense of that, you are taken care of, or you have at least what you need. And so be careful with the ego. And remember, it's not about the things, but it's about the feelings, is what we're trying to create here. And through this, we will learn that getting the things is really not the solution. Much like Dr. Hawkins knew that the ego path was ultimately a dead end. In this section, Dr. Hawkins will encourage you to step off the ego path onto a more rewarding, fulfilling, and service-oriented enlightenment path. And as he explains, the path you will travel begins with your own personal choice. Everybody's aware that when they are faced with the choice between the high road and the low road, that's a common experience. For example, you could get a better grade by cheating, or you could get an honest grade by not cheating. We have to make those decisions in our lives over and over. To me, David Hawkins says, and the book says, once again, reading from The Wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins, for purposes of teaching and commentary and expanding the mind so that we can increase our awareness and understanding of the nature of God and reality in order to increase the quality of our lives and the lives of those around us, and hopefully increase the consciousness of the entire human race. But back to this idea of moving into a new area in our lives, going from the ego to service. And so these dilemmas that we face of trying to make the right decision, and the path we travel begins with our personal choice. And so this dilemma of human existence is that we have to choose every second. The book continues, quote, every second of every minute of your mind is constantly making choices. The challenge of human existence is phenomenal when you look at it. But because you're used to it, we don't realize how phenomenal it is and miraculous. I think that's important for us to notice. That's what the Hermetica was kind of getting at, is that really, one of the simple purposes of life is to realize how miraculous creation is and the continued process of it all, and then to see that and appreciate it and tend to it. That's it. Every single moment when I speak, David Hawkins continues, my mind is choosing words. How do I enunciate that word? How do I phrase my messages, contextualize them, amplify them? I'm deciding whether to explain myself more, or if I should just let the other person worry about it. I see it. We all go through this every time we're having a conversation, especially when I'm doing these videos. And it's like, so for every single word that I'm choosing, David Hawkins is saying, but works for any of us as well, there are probably 50 different possible options. He says, I could suddenly become comical and break the seriousness. And for some people, that would help them. Other people would say, oh, I can't believe that's what he's saying. He's not taking this seriously. This is actually very funny to me. That would be, to them, other people would say, oh, I can't believe what he's saying. He's just being lighthearted about things. They don't see the spiritual value of humor. So the human, at every instance, every fractional instant, is choosing between this thought and that thought, between this option and that option, this opinion and that opinion, this, shall I shift in my chair? I was just having that thought, actually. I need to get a new computer chair. This one was like one of those $20 cheap ones, and I've been using it for like 3 years. Definitely need a new chair. Should I shift in my chair? Or, the book continues, I just had to decide that. There are probably half a dozen conscious options, and there's probably dozens of unconscious options that we always have the opportunity to choose or unconsciously choose or not choose. But what are we talking about here? We're talking about moving from ego to service. rather than serving yourself, serving others. And this new, it described it so well right there. This new way of stepping off the ego path into a path that is far more rewarding, fulfilling, service oriented, and a path of and to enlightenment, personal discovery, and understanding, emotionally and spiritually. And so this is why he's laying out this dialogue about how constantly we are choosing and choosing. And so there's probably, he says, dozens of unconscious options, ways that we could go. Should I encourage them to go in that direction, or should I discourage them from following that track? We're always trying to influence, and we're always making choices. I always feel sorry for the human condition, Dr. Hawkins says, and that you can never really be content, because the minute you're content, you're even wondering if you should be content. I love this guy. These are the kind of things that I say to myself, is it's like, he goes, I always feel sorry for the human condition, in that you can never be content, because the minute you get content, you're even wondering if you should be content. It continues, there's very little rest for us humans, but our minds are constantly presenting an endless array of options. People say they don't believe in karma. Well, you don't have to use that word. What you can see is that your mind is endlessly, constantly confronted with options, and your whole life is going to change depending on what option we pick. It's like a giant map, an electronic map. And if you choose this direction, you're going to end up hundreds of miles from if you'd chosen the other direction. So making choices is the major human occupation. Yet nobody ever mentions it. And they definitely never teach us the best possible way to deal with this reality. Maybe this is the area for those of us who are into personal development and spiritual philosophy, mysticism, and all of the great things that I love to look at on this channel and in my own life. Yet, nobody ever mentions it, the major human preoccupation, and it eclipses all others. It is the constant making of choices. Should I look in that direction or not? Should I try to get this job? Should I say this or say that? Should I wear this? Should I walk on the other side of the sidewalk? Should I call so-and-so? Should I let this bill wait another 2 weeks? The answer to that one is probably not. What you see is a projection of our own consciousness. This was an overarching theme of Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life by Dr. Wayne W. Dyer, teaching us the wisdom of the Tao from Lao Tzu. And that was the wisdom of the Tao, was that there are ways that we look at the world, and these ways need to be looked at, or we need to begin to change the way that we are going about certain things. And so what we see is a very important understanding, and we'll finish it up here in this final little bit, or with this little section before we get to the difference between force and power. What we see is a projection of our own consciousness. So if we think that the world is evil and everyone is out to get everyone, and there's danger lurking around every corner and sicknesses on every surface, and whether the birds and the bugs are going to sting you and bite you. And if you have this perspective of the world, then this is the world that you will experience for yourself. When someone next to you in the very same world could have the opposite perspective, that everything is wonderful and everyone's out to help each other, and the birds and the bugs and everything is safe. Don't worry about anything, which you can see how a in-between area may be the correct, but besides the point, is that that is the world that you will experience while being in the very same place that the other person was in. You will have two entirely different experiences, because what we see and experience is a projection of our own thoughts, beliefs, and our consciousness. Now, back to what the book's saying here. Quote, "It's what you project out into the world. Whether you see this world as sad, happy," okay, I kind of doubled down there. I didn't know I was going to say everything I said. "When you see the world as sad, happy, ludicrous, beneficial, beautiful, divine, frustrating, corrupt, evil, or an infinite good. If a man is to progress to realize the ultimate divinity, which is the core of our existence, man or woman, then it would require progressively growing into that dimension of awareness. Because if our projection of our thoughts and beliefs and our consciousness is the experience that we have, then if we want to have a divine spiritual experience in life, then we must begin to progressively grow that belief, that awareness, that viewpoint, that perspective, that understanding, that projection. We must begin to grow into that dimension of awareness. The karmic benefit of human lifetime, as the Buddha said, would be self-rewarding. Wow, that was a deep sentence. The karmic benefit of this practice of growing into this ultimate divinity, and we've talked about the nature of God and oneness and all of that at different times on this channel. So if you've missed that, then be sure to look for videos titled Oneness or Talking About God, or a lot of the ones we've done recently in the past 6 months or so. Let me read those two sentences again, because that was powerful. If a man is to progress to realize ultimate divinity, which is ultimately the core of our existence anyways, I'm paraphrasing kind of, then it would require our progressively growing into that direction and that dimension of awareness, or our perspective on things. And then, as the Buddha said, the karmic benefit of human lifetime would be self-rewarding in the end. Fortunate, the book continues, it is to be born a human. Even more fortunate, it is to have heard of enlightenment, and then to proceed to pursue it. And I might add, rarer than that is to achieve enlightenment, because it requires tenacity. The roadway to enlightenment takes you through difficult terrain, like a walk through a swamp. And we'll finish with the great quote from the Buddha, I believe. Fortunate it is to be born a human. Even more fortunate it is to have heard of enlightenment. But rarer still, and even far more fortunate still, is to be born a human to have heard of enlightenment and then proceed to pursue it. And I'll add even more rare so, to do all those things and then achieve enlightenment. Because many of us are born a human, and many of us have heard of this idea of enlightenment, but not all of us have the inclination or even the slight interest of pursuing this thing called enlightenment. But if you are here, ladies and gentlemen, and we are here, just think of the time, then you are part of the hopefully more than 0.1% of us out here. Because hopefully our numbers are growing. And there will come a time, as even Thoth, the Egyptian sage god, or Hermes Trismegistus in the Greek, said, that there will come a time when the minds who will wander the wastelands of life will perish and will pass on to those of a new, more pure mind and heart, and we will be ready to receive the wisdom of the ages. Today, the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins. Powerful, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be a fun one, actually. I'm liking where this is going. I like the style that David writes. It's it's deep, but it's like a story too. And I don't know, he has a good way about writing, at least for me personally. And so what we'll be going into in the future, it looks like, we will be discovering more of the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins. And we will be learning more about moving from the ego to service. But next week, we'll be looking at the difference between force and power. And what is this thing that keeps being referred to as power and force? I mean, if there's a tome this big on the subject, then I'll be looking in a smaller way so that we can discover this for ourselves and discover truth and subjectivity and calibrating the consciousness level of mankind. Exciting, ladies and gentlemen. The duality of the ego, that'll be probably a couple weeks from now. And then we will get to chapter 2, going through the calibration of the levels of consciousness and transcending the mind and the linear domain and the higher levels of consciousness. It says in the 500s, which are quite amazing, one is overcome by the sheer beauty of everything. While at the lower levels of consciousness, the beauty is nearly impossible to see. Wow, chapter 3 is spiritual consciousness. Exciting, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to use this bookmark. And I just want to say thank you so much to those of you that spend time here with me and David Hawkins, Dr. Wayne W. Dyer in the past, Timothy Creek and Peter Gandy, and Thoth and Hermes and Lao Tzu and all the wonderful authors and poets from the wisdom of the ages that we initially started doing on Wednesdays. Almost 2 years ago, ladies and gentlemen. Almost 2 years ago. Boom. That is a boom to knowledge and a boom to the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins. I'll probably have this book linked below so you can get it for yourself to put it on your shelf. If not, just search it up, The Wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins. Ladies and gentlemen. Boom. All right. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, remember to be the change you want to see. But that's usually the last thing I say, and I actually give credit to Rex for always saying that. It's a good final thing to say. But remember to seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment, through a greater awareness and a greater understanding of the nature of ourselves, our minds, and reality. And through a deeper understanding of the lost wisdom of the ages and even the mysteries of our history. And so remember that there is no way to happiness, because happiness is the way. It is the activity that we must bring to life through effort. We have to practice it. And so once we can do this with some ability, with some gusto, as Alan Watts once put it, then all the things that we've been telling ourselves, oh, I'll be happy when I get there, or have this much money, or becomes irrelevant, because then we are there. And hopefully the entire journey is wonderful. All right. Love you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate all of you who spend time here with me in the premieres. It's fun to chat and go back and forth. And tomorrow, we'll be diving deeper into the lost wisdom of the pharaohs. And I believe the final section, our final reading, entitled In Praise of Atum from the Hermetica. And in this final chapter, Hermes offers up a glorious hymn to God, or to Atum. Wow. That was a fun journey going through the Hermetica. Don't worry, we'll finish it tomorrow. Until then, be the change you want to see, be the example you want to set. See you tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen.